Right, let's get started, folks. Andy, if you can keep an eye, please, on the waiting room and make sure to let folks in. I will get us started here. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Robin DeFalco. I'm with the Division of Local Government with DOLA, Department of Local Affairs, and this is an informational grant webinar about the Local Planning Capacity Grant Program, which is a relatively new program made possible by Proposition 123. Next slide, please. So today we will be covering all details about this grant program, highlighting why the program exists, what the top priorities are for the type of projects that we would fund, who is eligible, what type of activities and project types are eligible, how much funding is available, and then how to apply in this upcoming funding cycle or a future funding cycle later in the year. And again, throughout today's session, we intend to do questions and answers. We'll pause and give you a chance to ask your questions either in the chat, in the Q&A, or come off mic and share your question verbally. And then at the end, we'll take some extra time to dig a little deeper and ask questions that are maybe specific to your project, because if you have a question, someone else might have the same question. Next slide. So again, I'm Robin DeFalco. I'm the program manager for the Local Planning Capacity Grant, and I'm joined here today by my colleague, Andy Hill. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. Andy Hill, I manage the Community Development Office and supporting on this program.
All right, so Andy and I are with the Community Development Office, Division of Local Government. And of course, I just want to note that our partner is the Division of Housing, also part of DOLA, and we are all working very closely together on Prop 123 implementation and the various funding programs. Next slide. So here are the 3 funding programs available through DOLA from Prop 123 funding. The lion's share of the big dollars are with our friends at Division of Housing. That's money to build housing and money to support persons experiencing homelessness. In fact, within those 2 buckets, there are a variety of different funding programs. Ours may be the smallest piece with the Division of Local Government. However, I would argue it is a very impactful piece for many local governments. And this is funding direct to local governments, whereas the other funding is available to a lot of different entities. Next slide, please. So this program was recently established by Proposition 123. It is an ongoing sustainable source of funding. So while we're talking about this year's current and upcoming funding cycles, keep in mind that in theory, this funding will be available in future years as well. In the first year, we're coming to the end of our first year, fiscal year 2023-24, there was $3 million available for this program. We've launched the first round of funding and announced those awards last month in March of 2024. In the next year, we have about twice as much funding. So we'll have 3 funding cycles this year. Approximately $6 million is available over the course of the entire year. And our plan is to have 3 funding cycles in May, September, and February of 2025 next year. So we'll primarily focus on this current upcoming funding cycle, but in case you're interested in applying later in the year, the same information applies. Next slide, please. So in order to be eligible, you must be either a municipality, a county, or a tribal government, and you must have opted into Prop 123 or filed a local government commitment that has been accepted by the Division of Housing. That took place last year leading up to the November 1st deadline. There will be an opportunity to file a 2-year commitment later this year. Stay tuned for more information on that. And it's probably a little too late at this point for you to try and file your commitment and apply in the May cycle, but there's certainly time for you to apply in the September cycle or February of next year. And I want to emphasize that we welcome and encourage collaborative projects, maybe multi-jurisdictional projects in your region where we have one local government acting as the lead fiscal agent and collaborating with all those other entities that benefit from the grant dollars. Next slide. So the intent of this program is to increase the capacity of local government planning departments. That is very clear in the statutory language of Proposition 123. And it's clear that the focus of this program is to support implementing a system to expedite review of affordable housing by 2027, otherwise known as the fast track requirement. We'll get to that a little more in a moment. But I do want to emphasize this should be planning work, and it should have your planning department as the lead of this effort. Now, we recognize that not every community has a planning department. Sometimes you might not even have one planner on staff. We get that. That's okay. If you are looking to hire a consultant to do this type of work, that is great. That works. You may have someone who wears multiple hats. They might be a town manager and a town engineer who are fulfilling that planning type role, that role of reviewing permit applications. Whoever is in that role, that's what this grant can support. All right, next slide. All right, so I also want to emphasize that this is a capacity grant. The language makes clear this is to increase your local government's capacity to address affordable housing, especially expedited review of affordable housing, getting those projects permitted and approved faster than you're currently doing it. But it can also support capacity. So especially if you're looking at Prop 123 and saying, my local commitment will be challenging to achieve, we welcome you submitting a proposal that allows you to both adopt expedited review, implement expedited review, accomplish that requirement that's part of Prop 123, while also tackling other elements that help you achieve the Prop 123 local commitments, getting more units. So think of this grant opportunity as one that addresses both that fast track requirement and your capacity needs. I just want to pause and give a chance for folks to ask any questions about what we've covered so far. I don't see anything in the chat. I'm going to take a look at the Q&A. I don't see any questions. Would anyone like to raise a hand or ask a question at this point in time? All right, we'll keep moving on. Just wanted to give you a chance. At this point, I will hand it over to Andy Hill to cover the next section.
Okay, thanks, Robin. All right, so Robin queued this up very well. And just to recap, in order to remain eligible for Prop 123 funds, or to be eligible if you're not committed yet, in the next 3-year cycle, which is that 2027 to 2029, local governments must demonstrate they've implemented an expedited review process for housing projects where at least half the units are affordable. So in your commitment that's due November 1st of 2026, you have to show that your expedited review process is in place. And what do we mean by expedited review? The way it's defined in statute, it means a final decision must be made within 90 calendar days of a completed application submittal. Of course, there's more to that. There's more details, and we have guidance coming out soon. We just went through a pretty extensive stakeholder process starting last fall and just recently wrapping up to prepare some guidance materials on this requirement in the statute. And we have some webinars coming up where we're going to share that guidance and really go through it in some detail. So you can pick hopefully one of these 2 dates and times that are available, Monday the 22nd or Thursday the 25th, at different times. So if you go to this website, it will let you sign up for those and find out the times. And I see we have a question from Sally. It has to be a government entity, not a housing authority. I think you asked that when we talked about fast track. Government entities have to have the fast track requirement. And also government entities are the ones that are eligible for the local planning capacity grants. Housing authorities are not directly eligible, but can partner with the local government. Sally, raise your hand if you have more. Okay, good. Thanks, Sally. All right, so I'll note that the Prop 123 statute doesn't prescribe exactly how to implement an expedited review. It just tells you the outcomes that you have to meet, which is great because it allows local governments to use their authority to develop the process that makes sense within their own context. And our guidance document coming out aligns with that approach, right? Giving you lots of different strategies, a list of strategies that you could pick from or even innovate from to help you meet those requirements in the statute for the expedited review process. We have gotten the question from a lot of different local governments. Hey, our process we already comply with the 90-day time limit. We can do that. And so our questions to you are, well, first of all, that's great. That's one less barrier for you to, or problem for you to have to think about. But this grant program can still help you codify the practice or make any needed refinements maybe that you've been wanting to make, or just help you meet other requirements such as the commitment that Robin described. So it's still an important piece and we'll prioritize it like Robin said, but there are other priorities that we will be helping you address with these grant funds. Okay, so the applications that meet the overall program objective, basically that make it easier or faster to develop affordable housing, help you meet your commitment target. Those are the ones that we will be prioritizing. Expedited review can be a minor component of a project that does takes a whole host of different approaches or tactics, and that's fine. It needs to be, your application should fit your needs and your context. We expect all applicants will address expedited review to some degree. Either we've got expedited review, but we want to refine it and tweak it, and we want some grant funds to help us do that. Or you can say in the application, we've already got this. We've nailed it down. It's adopted and codified. We have these other priorities that we need, that we're coming to you for. And as long as you've answered that question for us, that should be just fine. If you feel you already meet the 90-day requirement, but you're unsure and you want to just float it by Robin and the team from DOH, send it to us and we'll look at it and give you some informal comments. I will say, we are not the deciders. It's Division of Housing that is in charge of the compliance for this statute, but we are partners and will support, and all of our goal in DOLA is to help everyone be opted in for the money, eligible for the money. So that's our primary task. Before we get into more detail on what types of projects are eligible, I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions. Or Robin, if you have anything else you want to add.
I'll just note that I did drop the link in the chat. So if you are interested in registering for those fast track webinars on April 22nd and 25th, coming up in a couple weeks, choose one or the other date. The link is there, and that session will be recorded. And as we mentioned earlier, we will soon publish the written version of the guidance materials. Any other questions on what we've covered so far?
Okay. Let's go on to the next piece then. We're going to dig in a little bit more on what's eligible under this grant program. So certainly, since it's capacity oriented, staff, consultants, contractors, to help review the housing projects in that expedited timeline. or to support other things that you're working on to meet your commitment or otherwise for your 123 goals. Any regulatory changes that you need to make, either to streamline or just to incentivize more affordable housing, definitely that is eligible. Anything that you do to further streamline or create lean business principles,
For
completely
streamlined
eligible.
development.
New software or technology solutions, your online permitting systems, great. Planning efforts to convert or preserve existing housing units, also very eligible. And then finally, tracking or documentation activities that you will be using to submit to show that you've met your commitment in 2026 for the next 3-year cycle, then yes, that's also eligible. So one thing I'll say about staffing, especially, well, really any of these projects that you submit for that have ongoing costs beyond the grant term, think about and talk about in your application how you'll sustain that long-term cost over time. The licensing fees for the software, or you want to hire a person, how will you sustain them after this grant is over? Things like that. Also explain how this is adding new capacity that you didn't have before. And Robin is really quite creative and genius about helping you come up with some solutions to really demonstrate that. So make sure you spend time talking with her before you apply. Okay, next. Other things that are eligible, project-related, RFP, bid advertisements, attorney fees that are relevant to some of those costs. Many of you are talking about creating IGAs so that you're working together with fellow jurisdictions or nearby jurisdictions to help each other so that the whole group meet your commitment. That's great. We'd love to help support those IGA costs to address the commitment and a regional approach, or any regional housing approach that you want to take with these funds. Also, activities that support your capacity to increase or expedite affordable housing, including funding opportunities. So yes, this can include some grant writing work, which is rare. It can also include the data collection, site inventories. If you want to do that initial step to take a site inventory of the publicly owned land that could maybe be used and repurposed for affordable housing, that is certainly eligible. Other costs that meet the Prop 123 goals. And then Robin's done a great job coming up with an FAQ that's on the webpage that really digs into some additional details. Okay. I'm going to pause here to see if there are any other questions or comments about the eligible expenses that I covered.
We have a question from John here asking, would a housing needs assessment be an eligible activity under this grant program? It is difficult for us to plan for affordable housing without first understanding what our needs are to guide us. So what we have said in the frequently asked questions is that because there are currently some other good sources of housing needs assessments, funding opportunities, we would encourage you to seek those other funding opportunities, especially the energy impact funding, More Housing Now. So while those other funding sources are available, if that's your primary focus, we encourage you to go after those other funding sources. At some point, those funds may no longer be available, and this may be the perfect place. So we may change that in future years. But in the meantime, we want to make sure those other dollars get spent. Anything you would clarify on that point, Andy?
No, I thank you for seeing that and answering. I did forget to mention, though, I mentioned grant writing is eligible, but we don't want to fund only grant writing, and especially if you already have a grant writer, but even if you don't. But if you want to add to the capacity you have to really focus on grant writing for, related to this work, in addition to a lot of sort of related tasks that person might do, I think that works out just fine. We have seen some local governments that will hire a planning department staffer that also helps stand up a housing authority. We think that's a very exciting way to build capacity, almost incubate it in a planning department, and then give it legs to grow into maybe its own nonprofit or other take a similar regional approach. And you can talk with Robin too in more detail about if we're funding ongoing staffing, then how that might look. Maybe you start out with a higher amount in the first year and step it down over time to help all the partner jurisdictions come up with a sustainable funding solution following the grant funds. There's lots of different approaches we can take. Anything else you wanted to add, Robin?
No, but it dovetails nicely into the next couple questions that are here from DJ and
Okay.
Catherine. I'm going to read them both and then kind of answer them both together. Could we use the grant funds for pre-development activities? And would you cover planning for the construction of new affordable housing units? The key here is it's got to be planning work. And pre-development activities are often, I mean, could have different definitions of what pre-development includes, but if it's the architect, the contractor, the engineer, the survey work, the environmental site assessment, if it's that type of work that maybe is outside the scope of what a planner normally does, then it would be outside the scope of this grant. So if it's the planning type work to prepare for a future development, you're looking at the zoning, entitlement, building permits, the type of things that your planning department would normally do, or a contract planner might do on behalf of your community. If it's planning, yes. If it's those other kinds of pre-development activities, probably no. Andy, would you like to comment or say that any differently to try and clearly communicate?
No, I feel like I like how you differentiate there between just the planning work. And now we have a related question in the chat from Caleb. Could we hire someone to make ArcGIS mapping of the area we would like to develop? This is a two-part. I'll pause there. I think as long as it's related to the housing development opportunities that you're trying to create. Robin, would you agree that's a yes?
Yes.
Okay, the second one though, could this also include someone to map out our town for other general capital improvements? That one feels a little more on the line to me. If you're talking about, if you're trying to address infrastructure barriers to adding affordable housing developments, then I think maybe we could look at that. But if it's just all the general capital improvements needed in the town, that feels more like a CIP that you can go to the energy impact program for. Robin, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I agree that the two key words we always want to be able to tie your activities back to are planning and affordable housing. So we're not planning for market rate housing and we're not planning for a transit station, although that's wonderful. But if you're planning affordable housing that's near a transit station, that's great. But it's the planning work related to the affordable housing project or potential sites that might become affordable housing. And mixed use is also good, is also eligible as long as it includes some affordable housing units. Some communities that could be as few as a couple of units. Others, it might be hundreds of units, right? We're looking at local context, but planning and affordable housing are the two key words we've got to tie everything back to.
Thanks, Robin. And now there's another question that I love these questions. They're really helping us add some clarity to what we're talking about, because this is a little squishy when we want to be as flexible as we can to support capacity, but also stay within the parameters that we're given from statute. So I love this next one from Emily. Would a consultant to do community outreach and engagement be eligible? If that, I agree, planners do that all the time and probably not as much as you would like. And so just because of the time and capacity issues. So if you need to hire a consultant to help you engage stakeholders and community members to build support for and inform solution development around how do we reach our commitment, how do we add more affordable housing, then I think that sounds perfect to me. Robin, do you have anything else you want to add?
In fact, it will be part of our scoring criteria or evaluation criteria for the grant, and there will be a question in the application about what community engagement work you plan to do, how you'll make it inclusive and really target key stakeholders. So we will get into that a little bit more later. So yes, community engagement should be part of most projects, right? If you're just implementing software, if you say, we just need to upgrade our existing building permit software module, that may not require broad community engagement. It may only require maybe talking to some developer stakeholders who are your users. But most projects are probably going to involve some broad community engagement.
Okay, I love it.
Couple more questions here.
Yeah, I love Jocelyn's here too, because it really gets into a little bit more narrow focus. So would the grant be eligible for master planning of a city-owned property into mixed uses, including housing? I think if that affordable housing is an essential component, not a very, very minor component, Robin, would you be open to that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can say that this project gets us more affordable housing and these are units that will count towards our local government commitment, then yes.
Okay. Other questions? All right, let me go to the next one, and it might even spur a little bit more. Okay, so last but not least on this grant program, we talked about eligible expenses, but let's just cover some of the highlights that you guys are used to seeing. As Robin said, we have a full year's worth of revenue now, so $6 million available next state fiscal year, which starts July 1. Suggested max award is suggested, right? 200,000. If it just really depends on what it is you're wanting to get done and how big of a project that is. We've got our average award amount, just over 100,000 from last round. Larger grant requests may be considered, especially if it's multi-jurisdictional or broad, what am I trying to say? Broad in its approach. We do have a pretty low cash match requirement, no in-kind, but just a 20% cash match. You cannot use other DOLA grant money as match, like an energy impact grant, but you can use ARPA funds or any other funds. It doesn't have to be the city or county or tribal government funds per se. It can be partner funds. All right, we're going to go into how to apply next. Any questions so far on any of that?
Do
All
have
right.
a question from Amy in the chat here. Did I hear that environmental assessments, phase 1 or phase 2, would not be an eligible expense on a property? There's so many dilapidated abandoned sites in rural eastern Colorado that need to be cleaned up to make them viable for affordable housing. I see a planner writing grants for that type of cleanup, but we would need to know if we have issues first. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it, Amy. Environmental site the cost of the environmental site assessment would generally not be eligible. However, we would allow you to go after some funding that would help you do that, right? So if you say, in order to develop affordable housing on this site, we need to do the environmental site assessment, and here's a grant program. There's money through CDPHE, Colorado Public Health Department, to do brownfield remediation, asbestos remediation, those kinds of funding sources. If you can make the link, we are seeking funding that ultimately leads to this affordable housing, then I think our LPC grant dollars could support that work, right? Support going after that other funding source that makes that possible. So then doing the actual remediation work and doing the ESA probably are not eligible, but going after the funding could be eligible. Andy, do you agree? Or any clarification?
Yes, I was just putting a little note in chat, but I agree. And we can sit and think about that some more, but I think that sounds very consistent with how we've been talking about it. And Amy, you're absolutely right. That is an issue that we have tried to make eligible under the Energy Impact More Housing Now grant program. And so if you don't already have an application in for that, talk to your field, your regional manager and DLG about other funds and regular energy impact funds, things like that for those needs.
Oh, and the thing I would add too, as part of Amy's question here, is that a planner might need to spend their staff time navigating all of that work, right? That takes a lot of work. Or a town might need an external planning consultant to help navigate those pieces. That is eligible, right? We understand that a lot of local governments don't have capacity to tackle those big issues, and those are barriers to getting there. So if this helps you address your capacity, then the answer is yes. All righty, so let's dig in now to how to apply. First thing, attend the webinar, which you're all doing. That's wonderful. If you're watching the recording, those of you who watch the recording later, great, you've checked that one off. The next step is please review all of the application materials on the website. Just yesterday, we finally got the new updated versions of the program guidelines, the frequently asked questions, the new project budget template and application template questions. So those are items that you can download, dig into, and learn pretty much everything we're covering here, but you can refer back to that. So there's the website link. It's easy to find on Google, and it's all there. The next thing is schedule a pre-application meeting with the program manager. That is me, Robin DeFalco. The reason we have this pre-application meeting is to provide you with technical assistance, to support you in submitting a strong proposal that is eligible, right? So it's just a chance to ask questions, make sure you understand, well, what about this? What about that? I'm available for technical assistance throughout, but we want you to have that one pre-application meeting to really dig into your proposal. Hopefully you have kind of a well fleshed out project idea in mind. The other reason is that now you're on my contact list. And so if there's anything that comes up throughout the application process, I know who to reach out to say, hey folks, there's a technical glitch happening in the portal. We want you to be aware of this. Or, you know, whatever it is, I now have a set group of people rather than trying to email hundreds of people across the state who may or may not be submitting an application. So that's the reason for that meeting. Whenever possible, I will try to include your DLG regional manager, who is also available to support you through the process. The next step is make sure you schedule your local governing body to approve submission of this grant. The grant application will ask you, do you have, you know, what's your official action by your local governing body, your board of trustees, county commissioners, city council, et cetera, that approve submitting this grant and committing to the local match requirement. The application, all the questions are in a template that you can download. You can start to prepare your draft responses and work on your budget, figure out those numbers, and then you'll submit that application through the DLG grants portal. If you don't yet have an account, you will need to create one. If you already have an account, you're set. You just, on May 1st, when things open up, when we publish the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability, that's when you'll see the ability to click and begin your application. And again, the application deadline is June 3rd. Okay, I think we're good to go to the next slide. All right, so I kind of got into some of this already, but the other thing I want to emphasize is please book your pre-application with me before May 15th. And I'm saying do the booking before May 15th. It's okay if the meeting takes place after May 15th, but as we get closer and closer to that June 3rd application deadline, my calendar may be booked. I do have a couple days in that time frame where I'm, booked the whole day for an all-day training. So I just want you to plan ahead, get on my calendar, and ideally come to me with your idea thought through, so that we're not just inventing things. If you're ready to meet with me right now and you're still figuring things out, that's okay. That's great. You'll get on my list. But just plan ahead and make sure you get on my calendar, because I can't do much to help you if you reach out to me on May 31st. All righty. Okay, so the items that are published there, one more item that is not there is the application form viewer, where you will see a PDF of what the form looks like online. That's because the online version isn't ready yet, but as soon as it is, that will be added to the site so you can kind of see what the form looks like. But that draft template of application questions, again, it's downloadable. And the instructions on page 1 are important. I know a lot of times folks just don't bother to read instructions, but there are important instructions that I'd like you to read. And then that project budget worksheet is also a downloadable form. And we'll take a look at what that looks like in a minute. I think we can go to the next slide. Here it is. Okay, so the spreadsheet looks like this. This is an example. In this example, someone has 3 different budget line items. They've got a consultant, they've got some funding for personnel costs, and they're planning to do a software upgrade. So these are 3 budget line items that are allowable. Please don't make up budget line items. Don't come up with some, something that's not one of these 3. If you're having a consultant do your community engagement, that cost goes into consultant services. If you're having a consultant help you with your software upgrade, is a little bit of a gray area. You can kind of put those in one or the other bucket, but we'll probably call it software upgrade if you've selected a vendor that is implementing your software upgrade and doing all of the data migration and staff training and all those pieces. We'll probably just call that software upgrade. Personnel costs are somebody who receives a paycheck, who submits a timesheet and receives a paycheck. One thing we get asked about a lot is, well, what about an independent contractor, right? So somebody who is not an employee, not a benefited employee. That person, if they're an independent contractor, is probably submitting an invoice, probably once a month, and getting paid with a check or direct deposit or something, but they're not an employee. So they're more like a consultant. So that would be consultant services if someone is an independent contractor. And really look closely at all those HR rules about who should be characterized or classified as an employee versus a contractor, right? Okay, so in this example budget, each of the line items has 80% grant funds, 20% local match, and it's 20% of the project total, right? It's not always like this, and your project could be just that first line item, consultant services. Maybe your total project cost is $50,000 and you're requesting $40,000 and committing to a $10,000 local match. That could be all you need to get your project done. Or you might have a couple line items. All right, let's go to the second budget example. All right, here's an example where the applicant has decided that the personnel cost, that blue line item, that they're going to split that 50-50. They have their reasons. They can commit to 50% of that employee, and we can commit to 50% of that employee. And then they've also got a consultant at 80-20, and they've got a software upgrade where they're sort of balancing out the difference. And you can see in the bottom line that the total grant request is 80% of the total project cost, right? So there are some different ways to do it. Normally, we're looking for an 80-20 split. Maybe you are offering a higher match because you're a well-resourced community. Maybe there's a financial hardship and you feel the need to request a lower match. Those are all options. I just wanted to show you a couple different examples of how the budget works. And feel free to ask me specific questions about your budget when we have our pre-app meeting. All right, in the application, there are a few uploads that we need you to do. You will need to upload the budget spreadsheet as an Excel file, XLS, XLSX, the modern, the newest version of Microsoft Word, Excel. You will also need to upload documentation of official action. Sometimes that's a resolution. If you need a template resolution, I can provide one, but you don't need to follow our format. If you've got your own resolution, that is fine. Occasionally, if your board or council has delegated authority to someone, like the town manager, to authorize a grant submission, maybe it's a letter documenting that. Letters of support are optional, but if you are doing a multi-jurisdictional project, it's required. We expect that all partners named in the grant application are putting in writing that they commit to actively participating in this project. And then you may support other or upload other supporting documents. It's optional. It really depends on your project type and whether you think we need to see it in order to assess your proposal. Okay, next slide. All right, so in the application, and I encourage you again to look at the application questions, there's a two-part question where we ask you to define your scope of work. And to make it easy on you, we created this checklist section. So there are 8 options plus number 9, which is other. And yes, you can check multiple check boxes and say, well, my project includes software. We're also going to do some land use code updates, and we're going to pursue some grant funding to develop some future housing. So maybe that's 3 boxes that you check. And then in the scope of work narrative, you're going to say, okay, but our version of the software piece is we're going to upgrade. Whereas another person might say, another community would describe their software implementation a little differently. So again, check the boxes and then give us more explanation of your version of that. All right, next slide. Okay, again, really think through whether the work should be done by an employee or a contractor. There's a section that asks who will do the work. This section in the application helps us determine, is this eligible? Can we fund this? And if it is, and we support it, which hopefully it is, it helps us now create your grant agreement in a way that accurately reflects what you're doing. So you'll be telling us, well, 50% of this person's time will be dedicated to affordable housing, or 100% of this person's time will be implementing this new program. It's a space for you to tell us this many dollars are allocated for our town attorney to do legal review of these documents. A word about attorneys and legal review is, if this is a normal part of your city attorney's responsibilities, that they regularly review this type of IGA or this type of deed restriction, it's not eligible, right? You're not adding anything. It's just what somebody does as their normal job duties, right? So we're looking to cover, we're looking for these grant funds to give you something that you don't already have, to make it possible for you to do something you don't already have. So again, in that who will do the work question, really describe that for us and help us understand how it's new and different from what you were doing before. Okay, and again, if you have questions about any of these things, go ahead and ask them, and we'll pause in a moment and address questions. So it's really important to us that we see how this grant is going to impact your community and have some meaningful outcomes. How is this going to make it possible for you to do something that you can't do currently? And there's a an impact question, and we've given you some question prompts. You don't have to answer them all. We're asking you to think about how could you convey the anticipated impact by the number of housing units you'll be able to do, the how many weeks you'll be able to reduce, days or weeks you'll be able to reduce the review time to get housing applications reviewed and approved. How many more units will you be able to build? How many people will you affect, right? Like, think of those kinds of metrics. Andy, I think there's another slide on impact. To what extent is this project really addressing the systemic or root causes that delay review of housing projects in your community? That's different for every community, right? But how will this be transformative for your jurisdiction? Will your elected officials commit to adopting new policies or codes? Or will they at least make a good faith effort, right? I know that you as planners cannot predict the political dynamic that may be present a year from now. But if you think your local government is really committed to this work, this is a space for you to tell us that. And if your community really lacks the financial resources, and if not for this funding, would otherwise not be able to accomplish your Prop 123 goals, tell us that. Make that case for us that helps us see that this funding makes things possible. Let's see. Someone commented, Sally commented, no sound. Does that mean that we're having audio issues? Can anyone confirm? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
All right, give me a thumbs down if somebody cannot hear. Okay. Any questions at this point? All right, I'll wrap up with my description on the application process by, again, highlighting that stakeholder and community engagement is important in this type of planning work. We do expect to see something. Again, that might just be targeted stakeholder input. Your project maybe is just you working with your developer community to figure out how to better, improve your process to expedite review of housing applications. Or it might mean really broad inclusive community engagement around land use. And when you do that broad inclusive community engagement, we want to see that you're getting input from everyone, but especially those folks who are cost burdened in housing cost burdened in your community. Those low income folks, those middle income folks who can't afford to, get into home ownership. Are you reaching all the different demographics, the disability community, the elders, senior community? And are you talking to both residents of your community and the local workers who maybe commute from outside into your community because they can't find housing near where they work? These are all important stakeholders in your community engagement process, and especially those historically disadvantaged populations who have been missing out on housing opportunities, sometimes for generations. So that's an important piece. I will pause and allow folks to ask questions about the whole how to apply section that we've just covered.
I got one question just on that last part that you had about the engagement. Do you want us to then specifically capture some of what is put out, or are we just talking about what we did to capture that information?
I guess I would ask, are you talking about community engagement that has already taken place, or are you talking about putting in your application, this much funding would get us this community engagement?
Maybe a little bit of both. Like in my mind, for instance, in the community, we hear it all the time. It comes up at meetings all the time. So are you wanting to just summarize that, or do you want specific statements from people who are doing that as part of this, or are you just talking about this is what we did and we received a lot of feedback?
Yeah, great question. I think if there's been a lot of community engagement around housing issues so far, and you want to share some details or what you've learned from that process, that's great. We are expecting that your project probably involves some community engagement as you work on any policy changes, if your project does involve that kind of policy change. Think about how much budget do you need to do that kind of community engagement. Different communities will need to reach different audiences, right? So do you need translation services? Do you need childcare in order for parents to show up in the evening, right? Like, just think about all those pieces. I'm hoping that answers your question, Tyler.
Yeah, I think so. I think I know at least the direction you're heading with that. So if not, I'll just swing back around with you.
Sounds good.
I might just add to, because Tyler, you made me think of another thing. I know some funders say, when you're doing the work, we want to see a lot of the documentation of that work and the outcomes and the counts and all the stuff, right? And I don't think that we necessarily need to require all of that documentation of everything that you've done. I will say, I mean, there'll be a place for you to put some of the outcomes and stuff, you know, hey, we had these great meetings and your progress reports, and it really informed this process. But I will say, if you have some particularly successful engagement methods that you've used, we would love to hear that, simply for the opportunity to share it with other communities, both in your application and in your reporting if you get awarded grants.
And I will add that if you are awarded a grant, now you get into your quarterly reporting, we'll be asking you to share what community engagement have you done? How has it included this diverse demographic in your community? So we will ask you to do some reporting on that throughout grant implementation. All right, other questions about the how to apply series that we just worked through? All right, we'll go on to the next. Andy, back over to you.
Okay. So before I dive into the evaluation criteria for the review, I just wanted to make a point. We did get a question about the sharing the slide deck, and we will share the PowerPoint. Robin, are we emailing or posting? I don't remember.
I could do both. I've got the list of everyone who registered for the webinar, so we can share the recording, which will be a YouTube link, and the slide deck. And we will also post it to the program website under the resources section.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so how will your application be evaluated and scored? Robin already covered this. A fast track is a top priority for our program because we want to make sure that as many local governments as possible remain or are able to be opted in and remain eligible for the funds. But of course, any help that that you need to reach your commitment will also be rated very highly. Of course, we're focused on impact. Robin touched on this. The impact of your project as it relates to you staying eligible for funds, your ability to continue to receive those funds by meeting your fast track requirement and your commitment target. We also look at readiness. Do you have a solid plan for how this is going to work, the timeline it's going to require? What are the steps? That all really demonstrates your readiness. Have you done or are you planning to do, and do you have a good plan for stakeholder and community engagement as it relates to your project? And Robin covered that. Do you have support from local leadership? Certainly your elected officials, but also maybe other important community leaders that are important partners in your project and show broad support. And then we will consider financial need and geographic diversity. And we do scale and sort of customize or allow for the context for each application. So we're going to look at an application from Denver very differently than we might Dove Creek, right? It's just, so we will take into account different size, geographic elements, and you know, just similar kinds of flexibility. And of course, financial need, although it's not required that you have financial need. And then, of course, we also talked about your plan for any ongoing costs. If you don't have ongoing costs as related to the application, then you don't need to worry about that. But if you do, we want to be able to talk about that. So, you know, looking long term, we want to be flexible about funding various needs, but in the short term, we want to focus on fast track for sure, and on helping you reach your commitment so you stay eligible. Okay. Let's say you get awarded. How soon can you get started? So first, just to back up for a second on the timeline, we put out this notice of funding availability. That will open up May 1st. You have until June 3rd. And like Robin said, you have to be invited to be able to apply in the portal. So you have to have that meeting with Robin first. We just have found, and I think all of our communities last time found that to be really helpful. And then it does take us, about a month, sometimes a little bit more, to review all the applications and then get our funding recommendations in front of our executive director, and then get that approval and send out the award letter. So you can expect 4 to 6 weeks. The grant agreements, once you've gotten your award letter, don't start any work that you want to use as match, or you want to start that you want to get reimbursed for, because as you know, you have to wait until you get your grant agreement from us executed or signed by all the parties. And that does tend to take 3 to really closer sometimes to 8 weeks, depending sometimes on how long it takes us, how long it takes you to get things signed, and sometimes the back and forth as we get into some of the nitty-gritty and the grant agreements. So you can begin your project or start spending probably around August or September. And if you have any questions along the way, you just check in with Robin and she'll tell you kind of where you're at. So you can count on not spending any of those funds that you want reimbursed or that you want to use as match for at least 7 to 14 weeks after the application closes. So hopefully that helps you do some planning for your timeline. Let's talk about future funding rounds so you have an idea. Maybe you're not quite ready by this cycle. That's fine. We'll have 3 cycles a year, assuming we have sufficient funds. So we're planning on these 3 times a year for the cycles: May, September, and February of next year. That aligns with our fiscal year. And we're going to try to hold back a third for each funding cycle, but it will really depend on how many very urgent, time-sensitive, long timeline kinds of projects are needed. So we want to try to be flexible to meet the demand. If you really want to make sure that you get funded, apply sooner than later. But we will do everything we can to hold on to some funds so that the funds are there when you're ready to apply for them. So again, this is subject to change depending on requests, but we'll plan to award about $2 million in this first round, which will be, we really don't get the money till July 1st, but we're trying to get things all queued up and ready so that you can start, we can award and get all that going in July. But again, if we get like 30 great proposals, we might decide to award closer to $3 million in order to get the funds distributed faster and get communities going and meeting their timelines. We're very sensitive to you all meeting your requirements by November 1st, 2026. So let's see, I think our next piece is to do a deeper dive. So I'm going to pause for a minute here and see if there are any questions and turn it over to Robin at the same time.
Yeah, and also just a time check. It is 1:30, so we started at 12:30. If you've been with us for about an hour, if you need to jump and move on to other things with your day, that is fine. But we held this additional time, the next half hour, to really go deeper with some questions that you may have, and also just be available if you want to start saying, well, in my project, we might do this. What about that? Again, if you have that question, someone else might have a similar question. So we're just going to open it up at this point. The only remaining slides are just if somebody asks a certain question about a certain thing, we'll jump over and pull up some more details. So the floor is open. Please go ahead and ask away, and I'll double check in the Q&A, the Q&A, it looks like we do have a question. Could we hire someone oh, we already got that question. Never mind. Any other questions? Let's see. Do I see Amy's hand up? Go right ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand on Zoom. Do you guys have any, I think you said the average award last time was like 107,000 or something. Do you
Correct.
have, obviously I'm from a small community and we work in, if we play the numbers game, we'll lose every time. But in terms of percentage of population, we're impactful. So if a community like ours asks for a lot of money, is that sort of frowned upon? Should we, or is it sort of, if we can justify the project and the goal in terms of percentages, is there not, like, you don't have to be Denver to apply for 200,000, I guess is my question.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. And I would encourage you, you can look at the list of awards that we did in March last month and kind of see, if you look at that list of 25 projects, you will see that there were some big dollars awarded to some multi-jurisdictional projects where, hey, that's great. Multiple communities working together, bigger request. There were some small communities with a big request and some big cities, big urban areas with a small request, right? It doesn't correlate like that. So ask for what you think you need, make that case. We might have to say we can't give you everything you've asked for. Please don't ask for something that's unrealistic and you're just asking for the max just because, right? But don't be afraid to ask for what you need and think that we're not going to give it just because you're a small community or something.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and I see a hand up with Sky. Go ahead. Sky, do you want to come off mute?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm the on-call planner for Huerfano County, and I wonder if on-call planning services would be an eligible activity.
Yes, it is. We know a lot of smaller communities are in that situation where they don't have a staff person on staff for planning. And so, yes, it is. What I will say is this grant funding needs to give you something that you didn't have before, right? It needs to add capacity. So if you have one on-call planner and you need to increase the hours for that on-call planner in order to take on this new level of work or this more dedicated focused project time for affordable housing, that would be new and additional. It would add something you didn't have before. We can't just take what was already an existing budgeted expense, whether that's an employee or a consultant, and just replace what was already part of your city or town budget. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. And I do have a question in the chat here from Craig. Our Council of Governments has a new regional housing plan. Any potential for the COG to use funds to hire or contract a project manager to work through permitting of multiple local governments? Great question, Craig. Again, we love regional projects. The challenge is this grant, Division of Local Government, can award to a local government. So what we need is for a local government to step forward as the lead fiscal agent on a project that, like what you described, on behalf of all the participant jurisdictions who would also be named as parties in the grant agreement. We'd need to figure out how is the match coming in. Maybe each local government that's a partner is committing to X dollars or X percent of the total cost as the match, right? And then what's the role of the COG, right? So ideally the consultant, if you're hiring a consultant, that consultant is hired by the lead fiscal agent local government. There could be some other arrangements. So it does get a little complicated, but we will try to work with you and find a way that is legitimate and allowed under the program and aligns with the Prop 123 statute, but that can still meet your needs. So that's probably a good conversation for a pre-app meeting. And I see a question from Donna. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm Donna Metcalf and I'm with Downtown Lyman and we're a new Main Street program. And so I got onto this website, was sent to me from Gail with Main Street. And I'm also on our Lincoln County Economic Development Housing Committee. And so I'm really new to the whole Prop 123 thing. I sat in on a housing meeting in Hugo a few months ago. But so Lyman, I understand it, has not opted into the Prop 123. And so who does that, and why would they not have, I mean, you probably don't know that, but is it because there's matching funds, or they don't know about it, or they just didn't care, or what all is to opting into it, that maybe I could help with that?
Yeah, great. Thank you for that question, Donna. There are many communities, I mean, there are many that did opt in last year, but a few that decided not to for a variety of reasons. But again, they will have that opportunity every year to opt in. If they do that this year in 2024, it would be a 2-year commitment to increase affordable housing by 3% annually. So 3%, it would be 6% over 2 years, right? They have to establish a baseline and then file a commitment. And we say that's going to take a variety of efforts, right? It's not just Prop 123 dollars that's going to help a community achieve those new affordable housing units. So this grant program is one of those ways that you can put some strategies in place. So the website, the Engage DOLA Prop 123 website, has some great resources. If you look for technical assistance, we did a lot of technical assistance last summer, and there are webinars that are recorded and some helpful handouts. I'd be happy to chat with you or whoever a little bit too, but that process will launch a little later this year. We're hearing May, and it is the Division of Housing, our friends with DOLA, but Division of Housing, who administer that piece, which is accepting and reviewing local government commitments. So yeah, first one needs to opt in, and then the funds become available.
Okay, and so there's matching funds, and then you said they have to commit to this 3% annually, 6% over 2 years. So what exactly does that mean? I mean, what if they don't? Like, what if you try these initiatives, but for whatever reason you don't have investors or all the things
Right,
that
right,
goes with building affordable housing or any housing of any kind?
right.
Then what, are you penalized, or?
No, the good news is that it's more carrot, less stick. So it's really that if you make the commitment, you become eligible to access the Prop 123 funding. And if after that, it would be a 2-year period, you have not met your commitment, fallen short of your commitment, you essentially just have to sit out for 1 year and would not be eligible for funding in calendar year 2027. And then you would make a new commitment if you wanted to in a subsequent year. So there's not really a penalty. There's just that being ineligible for funding for 1 year. And I did want to clarify that the local match, the 20% dollar match, is just for this grant program. So all the other, so it's not tied to the commitment. It's the commitment is eligibility to access any of the Prop 123 funds. And then each of the Prop 123 funding programs has very different requirements, right? So there's a land banking program, there's home ownership programs, down payment assistance, homelessness support programs. So there's all these different programs out there, and we're just this one piece, which is the planning. But for a community like yours, planning might be the key that helps you accomplish all those other pieces.
Okay.
And the other funding would be potentially for developers too, not just for local governments, right? It might be a developer in your community that now has access to those dollars that makes a project possible.
Okay. So what we've got going on in our main street, we've got a a building that my hope is to put retail in the front of it and apartments in the back of it that may or may not adjoin that retail property. If the person that rents the front doesn't need that housing, then it would be available to someone else to rent. And then we have an old motel, or multiple of them actually, in downtown that would be great for affordable housing, renovating that way. So those kind of things would be projects that we had somebody that did the planning and all that other stuff would be eligible for some of this.
That sounds like a good fit, right? That these grant dollars could help you do the planning for those, to move those projects forward, and help with zoning, entitlement, that type of thing. But again, not for pre-development costs, not for the actual construction, right? Not for architectural and engineering. But if it's the planning work to move it forward, then this money could help. As long as, remember that you've got that commitment to do the expedited review, right? And, you know, maybe in your community,
That
applications are
I
already
did
pretty
have a
quick.
question mark by that expedited review. What is an expedited review? What does that mean?
It means that an application, a housing application seeking, you know, permitting or site plan, so, you know, housing application from a developer would be reviewed and a decision rendered within 90 days.
Okay.
And that may already be, you know, your community may already do that within 90 days. So that might be a very simple task to accomplish. Andy, what else would you like to add about that?
Yeah, I just would like to mention this, especially our Main Street communities that we love, but really any community that wants help this year trying to figure out, does it make sense for us to try to opt in this year because we're not already? And if you want help trying to do that math and figure it out, we offered that assistance last year. A bunch of local governments took us up on it. It was fun to work out the solutions with each community. Happy to do that again this year. So if you want that kind of assistance, talk to Gail or talk to Robin and we'll hook you guys up and offer that. Just kind of walk through the whole thing in a more informal setting, I think is really helpful. It makes it more real to spend the time looking at the actual numbers.
Okay. And then you mentioned money for developers. So this is the planning stuff, but then that actual money for doing the development, what does that facet look like for my housing committee? And then my husband and I also have own a housing development that's kind of on hold right now since COVID, because of infrastructure costs and some other things. So how does all that work? What's that look like?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to point you to the Engaged DOLA site, Prop 123, and I'm going to drop it in the chat here to make it easy for you to go there. This site has tons of info about all the different funding programs, about how to file the commitment. It's almost too much information, so I understand if it's, you know, you're not immediately finding all the answers there, but the other funding programs under Prop 123, developers can apply, nonprofits could apply, you know, that could be Habitat or another nonprofit that's looking to develop some housing there. So on that site, we do have some technical assistance with a flyer that lists all the different funding programs. There's money for land banking. There's money for concessionary debt. So it's kind of financing structure that helps a developer, you know, get the project built at a price point that they can offer those units as affordable for a period, usually a 30-year term. But again, each of those programs is different. So, and we could, you know, maybe in one of your housing team meetings, you want to have someone like me or another colleague come and chat with you about the different funding programs. And our partners over at the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority could get into more of the details about the programs that they operate.
Could you drop your contact information in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's on the program website for this local planning capacity grant program. Yes.
While you're pulling that, thanks to Carly. Yes, we had fun working with a lot of communities on just helping them walk through the opt-in process and the pros and cons and what it looks like and how to make it work for you. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
And Robin, thanks for adding your contact info in there. I wanted to check in with Sky to see if you have a new question, Sky. Could be that his hand was up from before.
No, that's a technical error.
Got it. Thanks.
All right. So I put my contact info there. I do want to acknowledge, I think most of the folks on the call maybe are just listening or maybe have left their webinar on while they grabbed lunch or something. But if anyone else is on the call, I do want to give you a chance to ask your questions. And Donna, happy to set up some more time to dig into more of those details about the opt-in process and the other funding programs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And Robin, you created some great FAQ slides. Those will be in the slide deck that we post, right, and share.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm happy to show any of those too if you want.
Well, maybe we could just walk through them quickly for the purposes of the recording. And if anyone else on the call still has questions, maybe that will prompt a question. So we did provide the definition of affordable housing that is in the Prop 123 statute. And note that for the purposes of expedited review or fast track, this is a minimum standard, and that we know many local governments are making their own definitions that might be broader or more inclusive. And that is allowed. Maybe next slide. So again, this kind of covers the details of the official action where a local governing body like a city council would make a commitment to submitting this grant application and what that looks like when you submit. Next slide. So we do have just a couple questions about fast track here, which again, I encourage everyone to attend the upcoming webinars on April 22nd and 25th, where we'll get into all these details. Next slide. Okay, again, the guidance coming soon. And again, just a clarification about when is fast track required. The law says that it must be in place by 2027, and local governments will be filing their next commitment by November 1st of 2026 if they choose to opt in to the next 3-year cycle. And it only applies to a housing project that has 50% or more of the units as affordable. Does not apply to subdivisions. And again, we're talking about 90 calendar days for a decision on an application. And we added some slides here about staffing because that often comes up. What type of staffing can be funded by the grant application? And again, the emphasis on adding to, but not replacing existing budgeted payroll expenses. As far as new employees, yes, absolutely. We can fund new employees. And yes, it can cover the fringe benefits, such as health insurance, that type of thing. Think of it as the grant would be covering a proportional share of that person's hourly rate for the amount of hours that they're working on grant related or affordable housing related activities. And overtime would be potentially allowable, but only for a non-exempt employee who is eligible for overtime. And it should be as a direct result of the need for expedited development review. So in theory, a community that has so many applications that they have to go into overtime just to get all of those applications reviewed within 90 days. And then we do require documentation. So if you're planning on asking for personnel funding, that person's going to have to keep track of their activities and report on a monthly basis what activities are grant related. So keep that in mind. And if awarded, we're estimating 7 to 14 weeks after the application closes. And you can get started on posting your RFP once your grant has been awarded, but keep in mind that there would be some risk that, you know, if something doesn't work out and your grant agreement doesn't get executed for any reason, you may be on the hook for those costs, and you should not actually begin spending or begin grant related activities until after a fully executed grant agreement. Right. I think that brings us to the end. So we're coming up on 2 o'clock. I think we'll wrap up. Oh, just a couple more. That question about housing needs assessments. And we do have links in the slide deck for seeking funding from those other funding programs. And then that question about pre-development costs and where else you might be able to fund that type of work. And lastly, legal fees for intergovernmental agreements, yes, as long as it's clearly related to your scope of work. And preparing deed restrictions, potentially, yes, as long as it's, again, not something somebody does as a normal part of their job description, but let's say it's new and your community's never done it before and you're figuring out how to do it, then it would be added capacity that this grant could cover. So with that, yes, the frequently asked questions are on the website. We just published them yesterday. Anybody else that's still on the call, would you like to ask questions? We do still have time.
I have one more question if nobody else has something.
Go ahead.
So another thing that we talked about the other day in our housing committee meeting is we have a kind of an old rundown mobile home park that's an eyesore, and it's the first thing you see when you come into town. Anyway, so we've always wanted to do something different with it, and we haven't got it bought from the present owner or anything like that, but are there funds available to put in like tiny home community sort of things?
So yeah, that could be a great fit with some of the other Prop 123 funding programs. The Division of Housing, one of their Prop 123 programs is looking at mobile home preservation, so that maybe the the city, the town might work with the residents in the community or the property owner and look at transforming an existing mobile home park to get some deed restrictions to ensure that it's got long-term affordability for the residents, the current and future residents. That's a great project. And again, Division of Housing money could help fund the construction, renovation, that side of things, whereas our planning dollars could help on the planning side and the community engagement component that you would want to have as that kind of project.
And so as far as the money that would be available perhaps to help renovate the mobile homes, blah blah blah, and that can be a privately owned mobile home park, then it does not have to be owned by the city or the county or anything like that?
It could be privately owned, it could be nonprofit. There are programs that allow for the tenants to establish joint ownership of a property, right? There are a lot of different scenarios that could potentially make that project viable. One thing to consider though is that usually if you get this kind of grant funding to support a project like that, there may need to be a deed restriction that ensures that the people who live in those homes are income qualified, that they meet the criteria for basically benefiting from that. So a lot of different scenarios, but we've got some great examples around the state of projects like that. So that would be a good opportunity to kind of learn from others that are doing the exact same type of project.
We need workforce housing very critically, and since we're a service industry community, I'm sure everyone would qualify, you know, income wise for
Right.
that. Okay, perfect. So then I can just, obviously I'm not in charge of the world. So let me talk to my housing people and see if there would be a time that you could either come talk in person or, you know, on Zoom or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look on the planning website, you'll see there's a link with my contact information where you can look at my availability and look at your team's availability and then say, it looks like Robin's available on this day in the morning. Let's pick a time. Or you can just give me a call and we can kind of figure out
Okay. Well,
schedules.
thank you. This has been so helpful. I really appreciate you, both
Great.
of you.
Great. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks.
Sally, did you have anything else you wanted to ask about?
I was looking on the website. I don't see the FAQs and I want to send it to my manager right now. So if you could just send me on the website.
Yeah, so on the local planning capacity website, if you scroll down, there's a section called resources. And then it says LPC grant program frequently asked questions FAQs.
Okay, I see. Oh, there you go. I just need to do that little line. There it is. Okay, ladies, a beautiful job. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Glad to see you, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, bye.
Okay. If anyone else is still on the call and you want to chime in with any other questions, go right ahead. Hi, Jillian.
Hi, how's everyone doing?
Good. Glad to see you here too.
Great to listen in. Thank you.
Anyone else today?
I think you wore them out.
All
That
right.
was good.
All
The
righty. Well,
recording.
thanks, everyone. We'll go ahead and end the recording and end the meeting. Reach out with any additional questions. Take care. Have a lovely afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.